Well, welcome to today's talk. Now, yesterday we looked at some really good news. We looked at evidence that immunity to SARS coronavirus 2 is now expected to be a longer term immunity and a good quality immunity. So I think overall I'm feeling still fairly optimistic and still fairly buoyed up by that, and I got a lot of very positive responses from that. But of course, where we are here in the northern hemisphere, we've still got to get over next winter, the winter of 20 to 21, before we have an effective widespread vaccine and before we have herd immunity. And what I've been looking at is a study that shows the effect of humidity. Now, we've downplayed the effect of seasonality on this virus in terms of the rain or the temperature, the heat or the cold. That doesn't seem to be a major factor. But this new evidence suggests that humidity is. And it's this way round. Low humidity gives increasing transmission of the virus. Low humidity, increasing transmission of the virus. High humidity is giving reduced transmission of the virus. So remember, it's that way around. So low humidity, increased transmission. High humidity, the amount of moisture in the air, less transmission of the virus. Now, why on earth should this be the case? Well, when we breathe out lots of respiratory droplets of very different sizes. And some of the more microscopic ones, maybe just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 micrometers in diameter, are described as aerosolizations, and they can hang in the air for a period of time. So let's suppose that this orange here, or this satsuma, is some water vapour I've just breathed out. And of course it's on a microscopic scale. And inside here, if I'm an infected person, there is viral particles. And what we don't want is for these viral particles to go from me to you. That's what we don't want. So the less time they spend in the air, the better, is one way of looking at this. Now, if the air is very dry, then some of the moisture that's associated with this droplet will dry out, and it will become smaller and it will become lighter, and that means this respiratory droplet can stay in the air for longer, giving you a better chance of breathing it in after I breathed it out, because it's hanging in the air. It's like floating in the air. But if the air is very moist, then as well as having these particles in the air, there's going to be water droplets in the air. And imagine this piece of plasticine as a water droplet. And what will happen is that water in the air will collect round the water droplet in the exhaled droplet that you've breathed out. So water from the air will collect onto that. So then you end up with water from the air and the original droplet that you breathed out. Of course, that makes it heavier. And when it's heavier, it's more likely simply to drop out of the air into surfaces and no longer be suspended. So that's kind of the rationale, really. And I'm going to give some good examples and some practical applications of this as well. Now, this is what you call a correlation study. Now, correlations don't absolutely prove causality, but I'm just going to give you some interesting examples of correlation just so this is making sense. Now, this one is the most famous correlation in epidemiology. Here we have increasing cases of lung cancer, and here we have number of cigarettes smoked. And this was first identified by Austin Bradford Hill and Richard Doll, probably the most famous story one of the most famous stories in modern epidemiology. They worked this out in 1949 and wrote the paper in 1954 and proved it in 1956. Anyway, so what we have here is we have increasing cases of lung cancer here and number of cigarettes smoked there. So the more cigarettes that are smoked, the greater the chances of developing lung cancer. So few cigarettes smoked, smaller chances of developing lung cancer. More cigarettes smoked, more chance of developing lung cancer. Yet more cigarettes smoked, yet more chance of developing lung cancer. Yet more cigarettes smoked, yet more chances of developing lung cancer. And we can actually draw this up as a line, and that's called a positive correlation. And if it's a 45-degree line like that, that would be a positive correlation of +1. And the value is called an R. That would be R equals +1. That particular line, there's a very good positive correlation there. So that's an example of a positive correlation. Or you can also get negative correlation. So here we have increasing number of COVID cases on an arbitrary unit. It doesn't matter, percentages or whatever. Increasing number of cases. And along here we have increasing numbers of the population wearing masks. So few people of the population wearing masks, more cases of COVID. More people wearing masks, less cases of COVID. A lot more people wearing masks, a lot less cases of COVID. So that line goes the other way around. That goes down like that. That's a negative correlation. So that would be R equals a negative 1. It's a negative correlation. Or in other words, they're inversely related. So that was a positive correlation. That was a negative correlation. So the more cigarettes smoked, the more lung cancer. It's positive. That one grows as that one grows. That's positive. Negative correlation, as that one grows, this one goes down. And it seems to be this is the case with humidity. It seems to be a negative correlation. So we have increasing number of COVID cases here, and there's increasing number of cases of COVID at lower humidities, say 30-40% humidity. But then as the humidity increases, the number of COVID cases decreases. So here we have higher humidity correlating with less COVID cases. So we see it's a negative correlation. Now this line is somewhat arbitrary. It's just it's not precise figures, but that's the idea of a negative correlation. But when this group looked at temperature, for example, they didn't really find a correlation between temperature and COVID cases. So that was, if the line's perfectly flat like that, if we did a best fit line through these x's, through these data points, you'd end up with an R value of 0. There's no correlation there. So that's the theory. Low humidity environments give more potential for viral transmission because the particles can hang in the air for longer. The droplets can hang in the air for longer, containing the viral particles. Conversely, high humidity environments, where the more water is attracted to the droplets, they get heavier and drop out, is going to tend to limit or reduce the potential for viral transmission. Now let's see how that bears up with actual observation. And this is where this fascinating study comes in. Humidity is a constant climatic factor contributing to SARS coronavirus 2 transmission. And this is just published this month. And it's a collaboration between scientists in Sydney, Australia, Shanghai, in China. And it's published in the reputable journal Transboundary and Emerging Diseases. And this paper is actually fairly accessible. It's not like that really stodgy one from Sweden I was telling you about yesterday, where it takes you hours to get to the science. If you do look at that, you can actually work out what it's talking about fairly quickly. So first of all, the review what we know about the spread of SARS coronavirus 2, COVID-19 disease. Mostly it's in respiratory droplets and aerosols. That is the main modality of spread. Secondly, it's in fomites, like infected surfaces that get onto your hands and then into someone else, into your face. So an infected person breathes it out onto a surface or an infected thing like a pen. I touch it and it gets into my face. That's the second way. And the third way is likely to be fecal oral, but that's probably a less important modality of transmission, from infected feces into the mucous membranes of someone else. So that's how it spreads. So what we're seeing is this is the most important one. And of course, this is the one that's affected by the humidity. Now, the effects of humidity. Exhaled droplets become smaller in dry air when they have less moisture to become enveloped in. That's the way around it is. So the exhaled droplets become smaller in dry air, therefore they become lighter, therefore they can hang in the air for longer. Now, smaller infectious aerosols can stay suspended in the air for longer when they are more dried out. The heavy, soggy ones fall out of the air and are not there to be breathed in for as long. In humid air, the aerosols are larger and heavier, so they fall out of the air. Good. Indoor heating dries things further through evaporation. So this, of course, is the problem in winter. It's cold outside, so we go indoors and we turn on the heating. That's nice because it keeps us warm and the temperature's not a factor in spreading coronavirus, or SARS coronavirus 2 as far as we know. So it's not the temperature, but when we turn the heating on, that also dries the air. And when the air is drier, when the warm air is drier, the virus is more likely to be suspended in the air. And of course, we also tend to shut the doors and the windows, so we get rid of the through draft and we have less ventilation. So we have these viral particles hanging in the air in poorly ventilated rooms, waiting to be breathed in. This is the big threat from wintertime. Now, not only does indoor heating dry out the air, making transmission more likely, if you live in a warm environment, then indoor aircon also reduces the humidity. Air conditioning also reduces the humidity. And this is probably what we've been seeing in the southern United States lately. It's been very high temperatures, so people withdraw indoors, close the doors, close the windows, put on the aircon so they cool down. But the aircon is also reducing the humidity in the air, meaning that the water droplets they breathe out stay in the air for longer, increasing the risk of transmission if that person is breathing out SARS coronavirus 2. So the risk is with heating in cold environments and with aircon in hot environments, because both will reduce the humidity of the air in a room where people are trying to keep warm in winter or cool in summer. Climate and behavioural factors could influence the evolution of the current pandemic, is what they conclude. So the climate means the more humid, the less transmission you're likely to get. For example, as happened in Thailand. Thailand's a very hot country. Not so much that it's hot, it is hot, but it's also very humid. Humid is the main point. And because it's humid, that reduced the transmission of the virus. But the behavioural factors are people going in, shutting the windows and the doors, not getting good ventilation, turning the heating on, turning the aircon on, both of which reduce the humidity of the air. So they're going to be factors. Now, what method did this research group use? They studied the southern hemisphere in summer and autumn period. And they were looking at local transmission of infections, because this is the whole point. How does this affect the transmission locally? How does high humidity reduce transmission? How does low humidity increase transmission? And they looked at the relationship between climatic factors and cases in New South Wales during both the exponential and the decline phases of the pandemic in that part of Australia in 2020. So they were looking at this as cases were dramatically increasing and when cases were decreasing as a result of the measures that were taken. So what did they find? Well, they found that the results were completely consistent with the theory that we've been talking about. Increased relative humidity was associated with decreased cases in both epidemic phases, that is during the growth phase and during the decline phase. So increased relative humidity decreases transmission. A consistent negative relationship was found between relative humidity and cases. So what we saw on that graph, this is a negative relationship. There's a negative correlation here. And the way it works, higher humidity, less disease transmission. Lower humidity, whether that's caused by the weather that day or by being in an air-conditioned environment or by being in a heated environment, either way there's lower humidity, and that leads to more disease transmission. This is why I'm worried about winter, because we go in, we close the windows and we close the doors and we put the heating on and reduce the humidity. And we have the less ventilation as well. Now, similar negative relationships have been found between humidity and the spread of SARS coronavirus, what I call SARS coronavirus type 1, the 2002-2003 pandemic, and the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus as well. So they have also got negative correlations with humidity. In other words, the SARS coronavirus 2, the SARS coronavirus 1, and the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome all are transmitted better in lower humidity environments. All are transmitted less in high humidity environments. So it makes sense that the SARS coronavirus 2 does the same thing. And the effect was really quite significant. A decrease in relative humidity of just 1% was associated with increasing cases of transmission of 7 to 8%. So this humidity does seem to be a big effect. No relationship with between cases and temperature, rainfall or wind speed. So these were the no correlation ones, so they can be ignored. They were ruled out by the team. And this is kind of what's led us a bit astray really in this, because we have been saying that there doesn't seem to be a great relationship between seasonality, and that's true insofar as temperature goes, but it's not true as far as humidity goes. I've actually looked at the humidity in the UK. It's actually not too much different all the year round, slightly higher in winter. But it doesn't actually vary that much. The key thing is we'll be indoors and we'll be artificially lowering the humidity as we turn the heating on. That's probably going to be the main factor rather than the weather. But this group were able to correlate it with the weather in their study area, New South Wales in Australia. Now, what's going on here? Now, actually, let's just mention something about temperature first. Virus does survive for longer at cool temperatures. That's true on surfaces. So it's true that the virus survives for longer on surfaces, but the temperature was not correlated with spread of the virus. The humidity was by far the bigger factor. So it's true that if you breathe the virus out onto a surface at 40 degrees centigrade, the virus is not going to last for as long as it does at 5 degrees centigrade, but they didn't find that to be a big transmission driver. It was the humidity. It was the low humidity that was increasing the transmission of the virus, is what they found. And that was consistent with work carried out in the Chinese winter, again showing it's not really so much the temperature. Well, it's not the temperature at all, it's the humidity that's making the difference. Study confirms low humidity as a driver of SARS coronavirus 2 transmission, especially when it's combined with poor ventilation, which is exactly what we get in wintertime in my country and in hot environments in summertime with the air conditioning. Right, now the reasons that low humidity causes more spread: respiratory aerosols remaining airborne for longer in low humidity, so we've done that one. Survival of the virus, or survivability of the virus, increases with lower humidity. So that's a possibility. That one's more speculative. Or indeed, survival of the virus decreases in high humidity. It's as if the virus doesn't like being soggy. That's a good way to remember it, actually. This virus doesn't like being soggy, so that could be a factor as well. But it looks like this is the main factor here. In lower humidity, the virus stays suspended in the air for longer. In higher humidity, the virus is more likely to fall out of the air. Now, applications of this. One thing is, could we use this effect to reduce the transmission of the virus by artificially increasing the humidity, thereby protecting us from transmission? So could increasing relative humidity contribute to a reduction in the SARS coronavirus 2 infection when infectious individuals mix with susceptible individuals? Could we use humidity as a protective mechanism? Interesting possibility. Don't know yet. But the big applications are indoors when cold, because we turn the heating on, which also reduces the humidity, thereby increases the transmissibility, and indoors when hot with aircon, because aircon is also going to reduce the humidity, therefore increase the transmissibility of the virus. So I thought that was a remarkably interesting study. And it means, because we don't want to be cold, for using my country as an example, in winter, and we're all closed in and we shut the doors and we lower the humidity by increasing the temperature, we shut the windows so we don't get cold drafts. It means if there's infected people and non-infected people mixing together in such environments, we are going to get more transmission. So yesterday's video was all really good news. And it is good news in the longer term, but we've got to get over this winter. Now, there's a couple of factors coming together here that concern me. One is the schools going back and the universities going back does seem to be increasing transmission. So that means there could be more virus around at the start of winter. And then when the weather starts getting cold, we start closing the doors, we start closing the windows, we put on the heating, we reduce the humidity. All of those things are going to increase transmission of the virus. So that means the big concern is a second wave or a sustained increase in transmission of the virus this winter before things get much better as a result of naturally acquired and vaccination acquired immunity in 2021. But I do feel that knowing these things can only help us be more prepared and more able to reduce the transmission of the virus over this current winter. And then by the winter after that, the winter of 21-22, I'm fairly optimistic that we will have widespread immunity to this virus. You can be watching more interesting videos. I can be doing some part-time work on A&E and digging my allotment just the same as last year. Now, before we finish, I think that was reasonably short, so we'll look at some of you good people. I think we haven't done this for a while. Actually, just before we do that, this was Debbie in Toronto showing the way that there's outside. You see, here we're outside, so we've got the ventilation. So even if it was lower humidity, we're going to get increased risk because of the ventilation outside. This is GJ in Melbourne, who looks well protected. Excellent. Thank you for that, GJ. Oh, this is James's mum in South Africa, who has very kindly embroidered me this this plaque. Excellent. So James's mum in South Africa. My apologies, ma'am. I do not know your name, but I appreciate the embroidery nonetheless. Thank you. Quite touching that you've spent the time to do that. Here's James himself, who I guess forgot to tell me the name of his mum. Never mind, James. I'm sure she won't tell you off. But seriously, I'm glad you're watching the videos. What are you taking there? Vitamin D. Excellent. In South Africa. And James is actually watching on 2 screens. So double marks there, James. Thank you for watching. Thank you for encouraging your mum to make that embroidery. Excellent. This is Johnny. I'm not sure where Johnny is, but it's surprising how many people watch me over breakfast. This is Kathleen in California, who's a physician's assistant in California. So thank you for that picture. This is Marie and Claudio, who are in Montreal in Canada, but I've also got relatives that they've told me about in Florida. So good to know you're watching in Canada. Thank you for the picture, and you also sent me a remarkably encouraging message, which I'm also grateful for. So thank you, Marie and Claudio. Now this guy's in India. We'll be hearing from him later, not in this video. This is Steve and Emma and family watching in Belfast, all sporting very colourful, probably homemade masks. I wonder if Emma had a role in that. Anyway, glad to see you watching as a family. Always good to see families watching together. Thank you for that from Belfast. Now this is a nice lifestyle, isn't it? This is Vernon and family who watch in Melbourne. Yeah, definitely a nice way to watch. So thank you for that. Okay, so that is us for today. Thank you for watching as always.